Hello and welcome to our web chat on cash flow forecasting, where Alex Fleischmann, Head of Market Development International at TIPCO, is going to explain how cash flow forecasting is made easy using TIP. Now, cash flow forecasting is a really complex subject and it interacts with almost everything in the whole organization. How do you find it?
First of all, thanks for having me, Jack. Our experience is that quite a lot of times cash flow forecasting, unfortunately, is done in a very ineffective manner. What do I mean by that? A lot of times, treasurers out there, entire treasury departments, they are forced to spend a lot of time with what I would call the basics, namely consolidating information coming in from the different subsidiaries, things like forecasting in different currencies, currency differentiation, reconciling intercompany cash flows and all of that, especially when they are dealing with Microsoft Excel as a forecasting tool or more traditional TMS systems. That's when things get error-prone and frustrating and really takes up a lot of time. The same applies when data sources that are available, such as ERPs, TMS systems, maybe budgeting tools or other systems containing relevant data for the cash flow forecast, are only suboptimally utilized. That's what we find time and time again, especially if forecasting is done in a very manual way. There's a lot of data in there, but it's not really used. And on top of that, everything that would be a nice to have applying smart logic to the forecast, automated plausibility checks, mapping of information from the ERP to the cash flow forecast, predictions, predictive analytics, all of that is non-existent because there's also simply no time for that and no system assisting in that. And bottom line, because at the end of the day, a CFO wants to have a one-pager telling him if the company will be dead or alive in 12 months.
Yep.
There's quite frequently not enough time left to create proper reporting on the available headroom, the liquidity reserve, doing plan or plan actual comparisons, or if reports are available from the TMS, quite frequently they are poorly designed or slow. That's really what we often find starting to work with our clients in a nutshell.
You talk about TIP being a multifaceted and flexible solution because this is a horrendous picture that we're looking at. What is the way you address these differences between the different companies?
That's a very good question. We do call our approach multifaceted because we try to combine all of these four elements that we're looking at here on this slide, but we tailor it to the respective clients, to the respective industry. Because what we found is that especially in cash flow forecasting, one size fits all does not work. Now, maybe to give you an example for that, predictive analytics is definitely here to stay, and it will work wonders for certain industries where there's a lot of data that can be used and where there are patterns that can be identified. Think of retailing, for example. For Amazon, it will be highly efficient and probably very meaningful to use predictive analytics. If you look at a different industry, for example, a company building wind or solar parks, highly impacted by regulatory changes, highly impacted by big chunk projects, which may look totally different this year compared to what this project looked like last year, they might come in and say, okay, that's all nice, but for us, predictive analytics is totally useless. And this is why we say we can't only focus on one of these items here. We can't only focus on the smart part. The other three are very important as well.
So how do you bring all this together? And if we move to the slide on TIP and your approach, how do you address these different requirements?
In the first step, what is core for us what is a key element that we provide is we don't want our clients to worry about the basics. For example, data consolidation in TIP, it happens automatically. It doesn't matter if you look at your forecast on company level or on group level, all it takes is 2 clicks and the data is consolidated. The same applies to things like currency differentiation. This is as easy as it gets. Different views of the same forecast, because certain people looking at the forecast, certain people entering data may only require certain categories. The colleague from HR, for example, may only be dealing with everything that has to do with HR payments, but may not have to look at any other forecasting elements. So all of that is just there out of the box. So we can focus on the other elements, which are definitely the fun parts, as I would call it, namely how to make best use of available data sources. That could be an ERP system from which we take over accounts payable, accounts receivable information, order data, or on a more long-term time horizon, information regarding the profit and loss forecast or budget information, potentially from another system than the ERP. So this is really where the fun starts, especially then using that data from other source systems and applying some sort of smart logic to the data.
You quite honestly put in manual data capture, which is really one of the big problems inside cash flow forecasting. How do you manage that and control that?
To start on this item, we can't live without any type of manual data capturing, because there are certain elements, dividend payments, for example, or large chunk investments that are not posted anywhere, which we can't take from another system maybe, which somebody may have to capture manually. However, preventing errors resulting from the data capturing, and that's a very good question, is exactly what leads me to the smart logic part, because in TIP, we have some built-in plausibility checks ensuring that the user is immediately notified if data he's about to enter does not make any sense. For example, if we have an outflow cash flow category that cannot be positive or data entered with a positive prefix, just to give you a very easy example.
So you use smart logic to actually refine and control the data. And how do you do that? Tell me a bit more about the fun part.
Well, as part of this smart logic, that's exactly where the fun, the fun starts. If you source data from an ERP system, for example, you may have information regarding invoices that you take into your cash flow forecast, carrying an expected payment date, right? An invoice is due in 30 days, which will give us an expected payment date, but we may know that a certain customer, or that all customers on average, pay late by, let's say, a week or 2 weeks or a month. And this is where this cash flow mapping and distribution rules item comes in, because in the first step, we analyze that data, we identify payments, patterns of late payments, for example, and then we put this information in TIP in the form of smart mapping tables or distribution rules, so that when we source data from the ERP, first of all, we sort of squeeze it through this set of mapping and distribution rules until we arrive at our actual estimated payment or cash flow dates. And looking at this data, analyzing it, and then setting up these rules accordingly in TIP, that's what I would consider the fun part. Same as the more sort of forward-looking items like predictive analytics, which is currently all over the place.
Okay, Alex, let's do a short demo with your starting screen, and then you can take us through some of the key elements inside TIP cash flow forecasting.
I'm happy to do that. I would say let's first take a look at what I refer to as the basics. in the forecast. So we have the forecast screen in front of us. And as I said, it shouldn't matter to you. It shouldn't be a big concern whether you are looking at a forecast on a weekly level, like in this example where we're looking at a 13-week forecast, or at a forecast on monthly level, for example. All it takes is 2 mouse clicks, and we're looking at a forecast covering a different horizon, different intervals. Now, we want to make it as easy as possible for you to drill down. So of course, you can always go from monthly level to weekly level, and even to the very details on daily level. As easy as that, drilling down and going back up, all it takes is a few mouse clicks. In a similar fashion, currency differentiation should be very easy. We're looking at accounts payables payments here in euros and US dollars. But what if you expect cash flows going out in a different currency? Well, just add it here. For example, Australian dollars, 2 clicks, and you're ready to go. Very much Excel-like. Click on save and the data is in. Another example, data consolidation. Right now, we're looking at data on a single company level, but similarly, we can look at all of Asia Pacific or even the entire group. So consolidation in TIP is just a given. It is nothing that you really have to worry about. What you also see here at the very last line is the immediate integration with your credit facilities. So you really know, okay, where is my liquidity going and do I have enough breathing room? After the basics, I propose let's look at making use of available data sources, such as your ERP system. Now, for example, imagine we tap into the data pool stored in your ERP, pulling in accounts payable information for your supplier payment forecast. We have done that here. So this is SAP data in the background for your payment run happening today, for example, but you may be interested or about taking a look at the very details. What exactly are we seeing here? All it takes is 2 clicks to drill into the details. And what you find, let me just increase that a little bit in size. What you find is every individual invoice which was mapped to this particular date in the forecast, compiling the total amount of 500 something thousand. And we find the GL number, the document number, invoice number, the counterparty, so your supplier, references from ERP, etc. So you really know what's going on here. And should you find that you have better information, you know that a certain invoice is not going to be paid today, but only tomorrow or in a week, you can simply make the adjustments here. You can delete the cash flow. You can shift it. So this is really where it gets interesting.
And that sort of work is done by whom?
This would typically be done by the respective person responsible for the forecast. Now, centrally, that would be somebody in the central treasury department. But locally, like in this example, we're looking at a German entity. This could be somebody working in accounting, somebody working in controlling, because these are typically the local people out there dealing with the forecast. And they may.
And those changes are audited. There's a track of who does what, yes?
There is typically a track of who does what, but in TIP, our approach is the local people are responsible for their forecast. So they take a look at what's coming in from their SAP. They can make the adjustments, and before central treasury is even notified, they have to confirm their forecast. So they make the changes, and only once they are done, they say, I'm done now. And this is only when treasury is notified and can start working with the data and doing their analysis. Now, in the next step, I propose let's look at some smart logic that I mentioned earlier with the example of customer payments. Forecasting our customer inflows for 2019, we start off with an empty line. But again, we may have a pool of data we sourced from the ERP, actual cash flows from the previous year, for example, giving us an actual distribution of what happened last year in terms of customer payments that we can use for the forecast. How do we do that? A right click to go into the distribution screen, another click to load last year's distribution from the actual cash flows in the ERP. Here we go. And if I now know that I'm budgeting with, let's say, 30 million customer inflows in euros, and let's say 5 million in US dollars, what happens is TIP automatically applies the historic distribution to these figures. I could make adjustments in an individual month if I want to do so. And once I'm happy, one click, and I take these values over to my forecast. I click on Save. And that's it for this particular line item, which could be a core line item for many corporates out there. So again, we use available data. We tap into the sources like ERP, TMS, or other systems. We apply smart logic to that data to assist in our forecasting process. And last but not least, because that's all fine, but at the end of the day, somebody wants to see a report, one pager, two pager, telling the CFO, for example, are we all right? Or do we have a problem 6 months ahead? So this is where reporting comes into play. And let's take a quick look at a deviation report, for example, looking at what does my current forecast look like versus a previous forecast, in this example of October 2018, and what is the delta? Now, looking at this, I immediately ask the question, where is the delta in my customer payments, the planned decrease coming from? Who is responsible for that? And all it takes is a click. The report loads again, telling me which entity is responsible for which share of this delta. So I can immediately identify France and Germany as being the big outliers. And now I'm ready to reach for my phone, call the colleagues locally and ask them what's going on, what is the reason for this planned decrease in customer payments. One example for an analysis report. Now, the treasurer or the CFO could be interested in something else. For example, knowing on one view, how are we doing? What about our planned available liquidity a few months ahead in the future? So we look at, for every single entity, available actual liquidity. Where are we starting off? And then using the current forecast, how are things changing versus a predetermined minimum available liquidity, which I could have defined on an entity basis. So again, immediately I know, okay, Belgium, sort of doing okay, revolving around the minimum liquidity. Brazil is under the weather, and largely, mostly everybody else seems to be fine. And then, of course, from here, I can again drill down into the details, either on group level, looking at the details of my currently available liquidity. What do I have in my individual bank accounts and other financial positions? Or I could do that on entity level, looking at the current financial status, planned cash flows, available facilities, and so on and so forth.
Now, this is a demo, but do you have live customers using this type of report?
Now, this is an easy one to answer. In this particular case, this is a report that we tailored especially for a Swiss client. So yes, such reports are live out there. Again, this is only one example, but definitely that's the type of reports we develop for our clients. And as we're talking about more than 130 now, we do have quite some experience in developing these.
Well, thank you, Alex. That was really important and interesting. How would you sum up the TIP approach to smart cash flow forecasting?
I think that all in all, the feedback of our clients is that what really makes TIP such a powerful tool is precisely the combination of the different elements we just talked about and which I just showed in the system. We take away all the nightmare of the number crunching and the consolidation and all of that. We connect source systems to make use of the big data that is available there. We use that data in a smart way to make it a part of our forecast. And finally, we put reports on top of the forecast, on top of all of that data, because at the end of the day, somebody wants to see a one-pager, the CFO wants to know where things are going, and we offer all of that in one package.
This is clearly the way cash flow forecasting is going. It's starting to be a fun activity rather than an enormous drag on the company and the treasury and finance departments. Thank you very much, Alex. Most interesting.
Thank you, Jack.